The glass mansion smelled like ozone and abandoned money. Maeve wrung out her mop, watching two 7-year-old girls systematically dismantle a priceless Ming vase while their father checked his phone. Everyone else had quit. Maeve just needed the dental insurance. She wasn't a savior. She was just desperate. The industrial floor cleaner Maeve used smelled aggressively of fake lemons and chemical ammonia. It was a sharp, hostile scent that clung to her cuticles and buried itself in the cheap cotton of her uniform. Following her home every night to the cramped, radiator-clanking apartment she shared with her 5-year-old son, Leo. Right now, pushing the heavy, waterlogged string mop across the expanse of the Cole Estate's foyer, that smell was the only grounding thing in a house that felt less like a home and more like a high-end mausoleum. The floors were Carrara marble. They held the chill of the air conditioning perfectly, radiating a cold that seeped right through the thin rubber soles of Maeve's slip-on sneakers. She leaned her weight into the wooden handle of the mop. Her lower back throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache that kept time with her heartbeat. Above her, the sweeping double staircase curved like the rib cage of some massive, bleached beast. And from the top of those stairs came the sound of running, followed immediately by a sharp, panicked scream. Maeve didn't flinch. She just stopped pushing the mop and rested her chin on her hands atop the handle. A woman in a beige cardigan, nanny number 4 this month, if Maeve's mental tally was correct, came tearing down the stairs. Her face was flushed, her mascara smudged in dark, frantic semicircles under her eyes. She was clutching a pair of safety scissors and a clump of her own blonde hair. She didn't even look at Maeve. She just sprinted for the heavy oak front door, yanked it open, and practically threw herself into the humid afternoon air, leaving the door ajar. "Another one bites the dust," Maeve muttered, moving slowly to pull the door shut. Harrison Cole appeared on the landing a minute later. He didn't run. Billionaires didn't run. He descended the stairs with a slow, measured gait, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the marble. He was adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, smelling of expensive dry-cleaning fluid and black coffee. He looked at the spot where the nanny had vanished, then sighed. It wasn't a sigh of parental concern. It was the sigh of a man whose flight had just been delayed by 20 minutes. He finally noticed Maeve standing by her yellow plastic bucket. Did she leave?" Harrison asked. His voice was a flat baritone. No hello. No acknowledgement that Maeve was a human being who had been scrubbing his floor for the past 3 hours. "Ran," Maeve corrected, her voice gravelly from lack of sleep. "Left the door open and everything." Harrison pinched the bridge of his nose. "I have a board meeting in 40 minutes. The agency can't send a replacement until tomorrow morning." He wasn't talking to her, not really. He was just speaking his logistical problem aloud. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. That was when the twins appeared, Chloe and Harper. 7 years old, dressed in matching pale pink dresses that already had dark, unidentifiable stains down the fronts. They stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at their father and the janitor. They weren't holding hands. They stood apart, a unified front of hostility. Their faces were perfectly symmetrical, framed by dark hair, but their eyes were old. They had the cold, calculating stares of feral cats cornered in an alley. Maeve looked at them, and they looked back. Most people saw the Cole twins and saw tragic little girls who had lost their mother as toddlers and were acting out for their father's attention. Maeve looked at them and saw an incoming mess she'd have to clean up. She thought of Leo's asthma. She thought of the $400 inhaler sitting on her kitchen counter, nearly empty. She needed the premium health plan this job offered. She needed it with a desperation that made her stomach cramp. "Girls," Harrison said, not looking up from his phone, "go to your playroom. I'm locking the door from the outside until Mrs. Higgins gets back from the market." "Mrs. Higgins quit," Chloe said. Her voice was surprisingly steady, lacking any childlike lilt. Harrison finally looked up. "What?" "She slipped on the terrace," Harper added, a faint, terrifying smile twitching at the corner of her mouth. "We accidentally spilled the olive oil. She said she's suing. She's in an Uber." Harrison stared at them. The silence in the cavernous foyer stretched tight. He looked at his watch, a piece of metal and glass that probably cost more than Maeve would make in her entire lifetime. Then, his eyes snapped to Maeve. "You," he said. "Maeve," she replied, keeping her grip on the mop. "Maeve, what do they pay you an hour?" 22. I'll pay you $200 an hour to sit in the playroom with them until I get back tonight. You don't have to teach them. You don't have to entertain them. You just have to make sure they don't burn the house down or kill each other." Maeve looked at the twins. Chloe was holding a permanent black marker. Harper was holding a heavy glass paperweight. They were watching her, waiting for her to say no, waiting for her to break. $200 an hour. A 6-hour shift. $1,200. That was rent. That was groceries. That was the inhaler. "Cash?" Maeve asked, her tone entirely deadpan. Harrison blinked, surprised by the lack of hesitation. "Direct deposit with your check. I'll authorize it with payroll." "Fine," Maeve said. She leaned the mop against the wall and peeled off her thick yellow rubber gloves, stuffing them into her apron pocket. She wiped her damp hands on her jeans and started walking up the stairs. Harrison walked past her down the stairs, already dialing a number on his phone. He didn't say goodbye to his daughters. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him, leaving Maeve alone in the silent, freezing house with two little girls who had just driven away a seasoned nanny and a veteran housekeeper in a single afternoon. Maeve reached the top landing. She stopped a few feet from the twins. She didn't crouch down to their eye level. She didn't offer a warm smile. She just stood there, her spine popping faintly as she shifted her weight. "All right," Maeve said, her voice dry. "Where's this playroom?" Chloe uncapped the black marker. "We're going to draw on your face while you sleep." "I don't sleep on the clock," Maeve said, walking past them down the hall. "Lead the way, kid, and put the cap back on that marker before it dries out. Those things aren't cheap." The playroom wasn't a room. It was a compound. It took up half the east wing of the second floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manicured gardens, letting in a stark, blinding afternoon light. The floor was covered in plush white carpeting that looked like it had never been walked on, heavily contrasting with the sheer chaos of toys, dismantled electronics, and shredded books strewn across it. Maeve stepped inside and immediately kicked a sharp plastic brick away from her toe. She walked over to an oversized velvet armchair, checked the seat for anything sharp or sticky, and sat down. She let out a long, ragged exhale. The cushions gave way, swallowing her tired frame. It felt obscenely comfortable. The twins had followed her in. They stood by the doorway, exchanging a look. This wasn't the script. The script was. They threaten the adult. The adult tries to establish authority. They dismantle the authority. The adult cries. Harper dropped the glass paperweight onto the carpet. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. Maeve didn't jump. She just pulled a squashed, generic brand granola bar from her apron pocket, peeled back the foil, and took a bite. It tasted like cardboard and stale raisins. "You're supposed to tell us to clean this up," Chloe demanded, stepping further into the room. "I'm a janitor, kid, not your mother." Maeve chewed slowly, swallowing hard to get the dry oats down her throat. "I get paid to clean floors, and currently, I'm getting paid to sit in this chair." You want to live in a garbage dump? That's your business." Chloe frowned, her dark brows knitting together. She marched over to a pristine, white leather sofa and deliberately dragged the black marker across the cushion, leaving a jagged, dark scar. She looked back at Maeve, waiting for the gasp, the scolding. Maeve took another bite of her granola bar. "That's a shame. Leather's tough to get ink out of. Rubbing alcohol works, but it strips the dye. Father's going to be pissed." "He doesn't care," Harper said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, losing some of its aggressive edge. "He just buys new ones." "Must be nice," Maeve said. She leaned her head back against the velvet, staring at the high, coffered ceiling. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on her eyelids. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night all week. Leo had been coughing, a dry rattling sound that kept her hovering by his bed, counting his breaths in the dark. The twins realized the destruction of property wasn't yielding results. They retreated to the far corner of the room, whispering furiously. Maeve closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, the twins were gone. The playroom door was open. Maeve sighed, a deep, rattling sound in her chest. She pushed herself out of the chair, her knees popping loudly in the quiet room. She followed the trail of slight, muddy footprints down the hallway. The tracks ended at the door of the master bathroom. The door was shut, and she could hear the distinct sound of a lock clicking into place. Then, the sound of rushing water. A lot of it. Maeve walked up to the heavy mahogany door and rattled the handle. Locked. "Hey," she called out, knocking a knuckles against the wood. "Turn the water off." No answer. Just the escalating roar of the tap running full blast. Maeve leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door. She didn't feel panic. She felt a profound, marrow-deep annoyance. She thought about the $1,200. She thought about the fact that if they flooded this floor, the water would seep down into the ceiling of the formal dining room. Harrison Cole wouldn't pay her $200 an hour if he came home to a collapsed ceiling. He'd probably fire her and sue her for negligence. She looked down. A thin, dark line of water was already seeping out from beneath the door, soaking into the thick hall runner. Maeve didn't yell. She didn't threaten them with their father. She sank down onto the floor, ignoring the dampness soaking instantly into the knees of her uniform pants. The water was cold. It chilled her skin immediately. She sat cross-legged right in the puddle, leaned her back against the door, and spoke in a normal conversational volume. "When I was 20, Maeve started, her voice cutting through the sound of the rushing water. "I worked at a diner off the interstate. I hated it. Smelled like old grease and bleached rags. One night, the pipes burst in the kitchen. Water everywhere. Ankle deep. The rushing water inside the bathroom didn't stop, but she heard the faint squeak of a rubber sole on tile near the door. They were listening. My boss told me to mop it up," Maeve continued, staring blankly at the wall opposite her. "It was impossible. The water just kept coming, but I couldn't leave. If I left, I got fired. And if I got fired, I couldn't pay my heating bill. It was January. It was 14 degrees outside." She shifted, the wet fabric clinging uncomfortably to her legs. "I sat in that freezing water for 4 hours, trying to push it toward a drain that was clogged. I cried until my face was raw. It didn't make the water stop. It didn't make my boss care. It just gave me a headache." Inside the bathroom, the roaring sound of the water abruptly choked off. The sudden silence was ringing, heavy and thick. "You guys think making a mess gives you power," Maeve said, her voice dropping, stripping away any pretense. "It doesn't. It just makes work for someone else." Someone who is already too tired and too broke and too stressed out to play your stupid games. I don't care about your dad's house. I don't care about his money. I care that if you ruin this floor, I lose my job. And my kid doesn't get his medicine. She rested her head against the door. So stay in there. Drown yourselves. Drown the house. But know that you're not hurting your dad. You're just hurting me. Maeve closed her eyes. The cold water was seeping through her socks now, an unpleasant, clammy sensation. She wondered how much a plumber cost on a rush call. She wondered if she had enough in her checking account to buy a space heater for Leo's room. A minute passed, then two. With a sharp metallic click, the lock on the bathroom door turned. The heavy mahogany door creaked open inward, hitting Maeve's back and forcing her to scramble forward on her wet knees. She turned around. Chloe and Harper stood in the doorway. The bathroom behind them was a disaster. Towels shoved into the sinks, water pooling on the expensive tile. But the girls weren't smirking. They looked down at Maeve, at her soaked pants, at the tired, dark bags under her eyes. "Who's your kid?" Chloe asked, her voice quiet. "His name is Leo," Maeve said, pushing herself up from the floor, her wet jeans heavy and cold. "He's 5, and he'd think you two are absolute nightmares." Harper looked at the puddle seeping into the hallway carpet, then back at Maeve. "Where's the mop?" "The bucket is in the hall closet," Maeve said. She didn't move to get it. She stood in the damp corridor, the chilled air conditioning freezing the wet denim against her calves. Harper didn't move immediately. She looked at Chloe. Chloe looked at the puddle, now slowly creeping toward the baseboards. The defiance in their eyes hadn't vanished. They were still feral, still angry. But the script had been ripped up, and they didn't know their lines anymore. "Well," Maeve prompted, her voice dry. "The water's not going to evaporate on command." Harper turned and walked down the hall, her pink dress swishing stiffly. She returned a minute later, dragging a heavy yellow plastic bucket by its metal handle. It scraped loudly against the pristine floorboards. "Good," Maeve said. She stepped into the flooded bathroom. The air smelled of expensive eucalyptus bath salts and the metallic tang of standing water. The water was over an inch deep, soaking the thick bath mats and pooling around the clawfoot tub. "Grab every towel you can find, the big ones." For the next hour there was no yelling. There was no whining. There was only the heavy, exhausting labor of water remediation. Maeve showed them how to lay the thick Egyptian cotton towels flat over the puddles, wait for the fabric to gorge itself on the water, and then heave the soaking mass over the edge of the tub to wring it out. It was brutal work for a 7-year-old. The wet towels weighed 10 pounds each. Chloe's hands, small and pale, turned bright red from the friction of twisting the fabric. "My wrists hurt," Chloe stated at one point, dropping a sodden towel onto the tile with a wet slap. "Take a break then," Maeve said, not looking up. She was on her hands and knees, shoving a dry hand towel behind the toilet to catch a rogue stream. "Your wrists are supposed to hurt. It means you're actually doing something." Chloe scowled, staring at the back of Maeve's cheap cotton shirt. She didn't leave the room. She just stood there for 30 seconds, breathing heavily, before picking the towel back up and twisting it again. Her jaw clenched tight. By the time the floor was completely dry, the bathroom smelled fiercely of the industrial bleach Maeve used to wipe down the tile. The three of them were soaked, shivering, and entirely out of breath. Maeve sat on the edge of the tub, wiping a streak of dirty water off her forehead with the back of her wrist. The twins sat on the floor, their pink dresses ruined, smeared with gray dust and water stains. They looked exhausted. They looked like actual children, stripped of the terrifying, precocious armor they usually wore. "Go change," Maeve said, her voice raspy. Put on dry clothes, sweatpants, something warm. If you get sick, your dad is going to blame me, and I can't afford a lawyer." They didn't argue. They just stood up on shaky legs and padded down the hall. Maeve stayed in the bathroom for a moment longer, listening to the silence of the house. Her lower back was screaming. Her hands smelled like ammonia. She pulled her phone from her pocket. A text from her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who watched Leo after school. "He ate all his peas. Cough is better. Sleeping now." Maeve let her head drop back against the cool tile wall. A knot in her chest, one she hadn't realized was pulled so tight, loosened just a fraction. 20 minutes later, Maeve walked down the sweeping staircase toward the kitchen. The kitchen was a culinary showroom, acres of white marble countertops, dual stainless steel refrigerators, and an 8-burner gas stove that looked like it belonged in a Michelin-starred restaurant. It was completely spotless and utterly devoid of life. The twins were sitting on high chrome bar stools at the island. They were wearing oversized gray sweatpants and plain white t-shirts. Their hair was damp and stringy. They watched Maeve enter with silent, guarded expressions. "I'm hungry," Harper announced. It wasn't a demand exactly, but it carried the expectation of someone who had never had to prepare their own meal. "Me too," Maeve said, opening the massive refrigerator. The blast of cold air hit her face. Inside, there was an absurd amount of bottled water, a jar of caviar, 3 types of artisanal mustard, and a single carton of eggs. No bread, no milk, no cheese. Just expensive condiments and protein. "Your chef takes the weekends off?" Maeve asked, pulling out the eggs. "He quit last week," Chloe said softly. "Harper put salt in his sugar jar. He ruined a tart and yelled at us. Then Dad yelled at him." "Right." Maeve grabbed a heavy copper skillet from a hanging rack. She turned on the burner, the blue flame rushing to life with a quiet roar. "Well, you're getting eggs. I don't know how to cook anything else in a kitchen that doesn't have a microwave." She cracked 6 eggs into a glass bowl, whisking them with a fork she found in a drawer that took her 3 tries to locate. She tossed a knob of butter into the pan. It hissed, instantly turning a deep, nutty brown. The smell of burnt butter and cooking eggs filled the sterile kitchen, making it suddenly smell human. Maeve slid the scrambled eggs onto 3 ceramic plates. She pushed 2 across the marble island toward the girls, then stood on the opposite side, eating her own portion straight standing up. The eggs were slightly rubbery, seasoned only with whatever salt Maeve had found in a crystal shaker. The twins ate them in absolute silence, scraping their forks against the expensive plates. They were starving. Labor did that to you. The heavy front door opened at exactly 8:15 p.m. The sound echoed through the vast, empty corridors. Footsteps approached, steady and unhurried. Harrison Cole stepped into the kitchen entryway, pausing to take in the scene. He was still in his bespoke suit, his tie perfectly knotted, but his eyes were lined with the specific fatigue of someone who had spent 10 hours negotiating with hostile shareholders. He looked at the kitchen. He looked at the copper pan sitting unwashed on the stove. He looked at his daughters, dressed in baggy sweats, quietly eating rubbery eggs with the janitor. "Where's the nanny agency replacement?" Harrison asked, his voice shattering the fragile quiet. Maeve took the last bite of her eggs, swallowed, and set her plate down on the marble. "I told them not to come." Harrison's expression didn't change, but the skin around his eyes tightened, a microscopic shift that conveyed immense irritation. He stepped further into the kitchen, the leather of his shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. "You canceled the agency," Harrison repeated. It wasn't a question. He was testing the shape of the words, trying to comprehend the audacity. He pulled a silver money clip from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the kitchen island. It hit the marble with a heavy metallic clatter. How much to leave quietly, and never mention to anyone that my children were left in the care of the cleaning staff. Maeve didn't look at the money. She looked at Harrison. He smelled like expensive scotch and aviation fuel. He was a man accustomed to buying his way out of friction, throwing cash at problems until they disappeared. "Dad," Chloe said. Her voice was small, lacking the sharp serrated edge it had carried all afternoon. Harrison didn't look at her. His gaze remained locked on Maeve. "I agreed to pay you to sit in a room and ensure they didn't destroy the house. I did not authorize you to dismiss professional caretakers." "The professionals keep running away, Mr. Cole," Maeve said, leaning her hip against the counter. Her back throbbed, a vicious reminder of the flooded bathroom. "Your daughters flooded the master bath at 3 o'clock. If I hadn't been here, the water would have brought down the ceiling in your dining room. The professionals would have panicked. I just made them mop it up." Harrison finally blinked. He looked from Maeve to Chloe, then to Harper. The twins shrank back slightly under his gaze, their shoulders hunching. They weren't afraid of him, Maeve realized. They were afraid of his indifference. They were afraid he would just turn around and leave again. "You made them mop it up," Harrison repeated, the words slow and flat. "Towels, actually. The mop was too heavy for them," Maeve corrected, crossing her arms over her chest. The damp fabric of her uniform shirt clung uncomfortably to her skin. "They did a decent job. Left a few streaks near the baseboards, but the drywall is safe." Harrison walked over to the island. He didn't touch the money clip. He rested his hands on the cool marble, leaning forward slightly. He was studying Maeve as if she were a complicated legal contract he couldn't quite decipher. "I need someone here," Harrison said, his tone shifting abruptly from authoritative to purely transactional. "I travel 3 days a week. The agency is out of candidates who will tolerate them. The private schools are threatening expulsion because their behavior is unmanageable." He wasn't asking for help. He was stating facts, laying out the parameters of a broken system. "That sounds like a parental issue," Maeve said, turning around to grab the copper pan. She turned on the faucet, letting the hot water run over the burnt butter residue. She didn't want to look at him anymore. She wanted to go home. She wanted to check Leo's breathing. "I don't have time for parental issues," Harrison said to her back. "I run a $70 billion holding company. My time is allocated down to the minute. I need this problem solved. What is your salary at the cleaning company?" Maeve gripped the sponge tightly. $35,000 a year. I'll pay you $150,000 a year. Full benefits, dental, vision, premium medical, Harrison said. The numbers fell from his mouth effortlessly, utterly detached from the gravity they held for her. "You move into the carriage house on the property. You take over their daily management. You make sure they don't flood my house again." The water rushing into the sink sounded like white noise. $150,000. Premium medical. Leo's inhalers. The specialist in Boston she'd been desperately trying to save up for. The radiator in her apartment that leaked brown water. Maeve squeezed her eyes shut. She hated him. She hated the casual way he threw life-altering amounts of money onto the counter, expecting her to scramble for it. She hated that she was going to. She turned off the faucet. The silence in the kitchen rushed back in. She dried her hands on a clean towel, taking her time, forcing Harrison to wait. She turned around. $200,000, Maeve said, her voice completely steady, devoid of any tremor. "And I don't wear a uniform. I don't cook for you. I don't do your laundry. I manage them." She pointed a damp finger at the twins, who were watching the exchange with wide, unblinking eyes. And if I say they're grounded, you don't override me just to get them to stop complaining." Harrison stared at her. For a fraction of a second, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but a recognition of a ruthless negotiation tactic. "Fine," he said. "Human Resources will email you the paperwork in the morning. Have your things moved into the carriage house by Sunday." He turned and walked toward the hallway. He didn't say goodnight to his daughters. He didn't ask them how their day was. He just vanished into the cavernous depths of the mansion, the sound of his footsteps fading into the silence. Maeve looked at the twins. They were staring at her, a strange mix of apprehension and something else, something that looked terribly like hope. "So," Harper said, her voice barely a whisper in the massive kitchen, "you're living here now?" "Yeah," Maeve sighed, picking up the heavy metal bucket she had left by the door. Her shoulders ached, a deep, pervasive exhaustion settling into her bones. "I guess I am." Chloe traced a finger along the edge of the marble island. She didn't look at Maeve. "Are you bringing your kid?" "Leo." "His name is Leo," Maeve said, walking toward the service entrance. "And yes, he comes with me. He likes Legos and he has asthma. So if you try to scare him with bugs or lock him in a closet, I won't make you mop a floor. I'll make you scrub the driveway with a toothbrush. Understood?" The twins looked at each other. They didn't sneer. They didn't roll their eyes. "Understood," Chloe said quietly. Maeve pushed open the heavy service door, the humid night air washing over her face, smelling of cut grass and car exhaust from the distant highway. She had sold her soul for a health insurance plan, and she was moving her sick kid into a war zone. But as she walked down the long sweeping driveway toward the bus stop, she didn't feel defeated. She felt something sharp and hard settling in her chest. She had survived the flooded bathroom. She could survive Harrison Cole. Cardboard boxes smelled of wet dust and split packing tape. Maeve carried the last one, a sagging diaper box filled with Leo's mismatched winter coats, through the heavy oak door of the carriage house. The air inside felt suspiciously clean, carrying the faint chemical ghost of lavender floor wax and expensive wood polish. It was larger than her previous apartment building's entire first floor, but it felt hollow. Leo sat on the center of a Persian rug that probably cost a year of her old salary. He was sorting his plastic building blocks by color, completely unfazed by the vaulted ceilings, the antique brass lamps, or the sheer scale of the estate outside. His breathing was quiet today. The new inhaler, picked up from a pharmacy that didn't have bulletproof glass over the counter, sat on the mahogany coffee table like a bizarre plastic centerpiece. It represented the exact price of Maeve's pride. She had sold herself to a corporate tyrant, but listening to the clear, easy rattle of her son's lungs, she knew she would do it again in a heartbeat. Footsteps crunched on the gravel drive outside, heavy and deliberate. Maeve dropped the box. Her lower back gave a familiar dull twinge, a residual ache from the flooded bathroom 2 days prior. Chloe and Harper stood in the open doorway. They wore matching Navy school uniforms, pleated skirts, crisp white blouses, and knee-high socks. The pristine fabric made their bruised, exhausted expressions look even more jarring. They didn't barge in. They hovered at the threshold, staring at the pile of bright plastic blocks scattered across the expensive rug. Leo looked up. He didn't have the protective instincts of an adult who knew what billionaires were. He just saw 2 girls staring at his toys. "I need the blue ones," Leo said, his voice carrying the slight nasal pitch of a recent cold. He pointed a stubby finger at a cluster of bricks near Harper's polished leather shoe. "Can you kick them over?" Harper looked at the blocks and then at Chloe. They had terrorized 5 nannies, flooded a wing of the main house, and actively plotted against their father's staff for sport. But a 5-year-old demanding manual labor was entirely outside their wheelhouse. Harper nudged the blue plastic blocks with her toe, sending them sliding across the thick wool rug toward Leo. "Thanks," Leo muttered, snapping a piece onto his lopsided tower. "Are you going to make us eat rubber eggs again?" Chloe asked, finally looking up at Maeve. "I ordered groceries," Maeve replied, ripping the tape off the final box with a sharp tearing sound. "Real food, bread, apples, chicken that doesn't come out of a tin. You want to eat, you show up at the kitchen at 6. And you wipe your shoes before you come in here." The girls nodded, a synchronized dip of their heads. It wasn't respect, not yet. It was caution. A sharp clipping sound of heels on stone shattered the quiet of the afternoon. A woman in a tailored gray suit marched past the twins, stepping right over the threshold without knocking. She had severe pinch features and carried a leather portfolio clamped tightly to her ribs. She smelled aggressively of floral perfume and aerosol hairspray, a sharp contrast to the lavender and dust. "You must be the new domestic," the woman said. Her eyes flicked over Maeve's faded jeans and oversized sweater, then landed on Leo, narrowing with immediate distaste. "I am Ms. Albright, the girls' academic coordinator. I was informed a caretaker had been installed. You will need to ensure the girls are in the study by 3:15 sharp. And whatever." She gestured vaguely toward Leo. "No. This needs to be kept out of the main house during instructional hours. I cannot have distractions." Maeve felt the muscles in her jaw lock. The familiar burning humiliation of being spoken to like a piece of broken furniture flared in her chest. She had spent a decade swallowing this exact flavor of bile just to keep a paycheck. She looked at Ms. Albright. She looked at the expensive portfolio. Then she looked at the twins, who were watching her closely, waiting to see if she would fold. Maeve walked over to the coffee table. She picked up Leo's plastic inhaler, tossing it lightly from hand to hand. The plastic made a hollow clicking sound. "Ms. Albright," Maeve said, her voice dropping to a low, conversational gravel. "I am not the new domestic. I am the estate manager. My salary is higher than yours. And this," she gestured to Leo, "is my son. He goes where I go." Ms. Albright's face flushed a patchy, angry red, the color crawling up her neck. "Mr. Cole said nothing about—" "Mr. Cole pays me $200,000 a year to make sure these girls don't drown his house," Maeve cut in, stepping closer. The floral perfume was suffocating up close. "He also authorized me to manage their schedule. If you want to keep your contract, you're going to lower your voice, you're going to step back out onto the gravel, and you're going to knock on my door." Silence hung heavy in the room. The only sound was the sharp click-clack of Leo snapping 2 blue blocks together. Ms. Albright opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at the twins for backup. The girls simply stared back at her with dead, unblinking eyes. They had watched Maeve sit in a freezing puddle for an hour. They knew exactly who held the actual power in this ecosystem. "I will be speaking with Harrison," Ms. Albright hissed, clutching her portfolio tighter. "You do that," Maeve said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Tell him Maeve said hello. Now out." Ms. Albright spun on her heel, her shoes scraping harshly against the stone step, and marched back toward the main house. Maeve let out a long, slow breath. Her hands were shaking slightly, betraying the adrenaline spiking in her blood. She shoved them deep into the pockets of her jeans. She wasn't a hero. She was terrified of losing this lifeline. But she knew the rules of the gutter. If you don't bite back the first time someone kicks you, they'll never stop kicking. She turned back to the room. The twins were still standing in the doorway. Harper was looking at Maeve with an expression that bordered on fascination. "Are you going to fire her?" Chloe asked. "Probably," Maeve said, walking back over to the cardboard boxes. "She smells like cheap potpourri and gives me a headache. Come in or stay out, but close the door. You're letting the bugs in." Chloe and Harper stepped inside. They didn't sit on the expensive furniture. They walked over to the center of the rug and sat down cross-legged, right next to Leo. "What are you building?" Harper asked, picking up a stray red block. "A garage," Leo said, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "For my cars." Maeve watched them for a moment. 3 kids sitting on a rug in a house that cost more than a small country's GDP. The air in the carriage house didn't smell like fake lemons or bleach anymore. It just smelled like dust, plastic, and the faint coppery scent of rain rolling in from the coast. It smelled, for the first time in her life, like she could finally breathe. That wraps up the incredible story of Maeve, the janitor who rewrote the rules of the billionaire's mansion. Sometimes, raw honesty and a mother's desperation are the only things that can break through unbreakable walls. What did you think of Maeve's final power move against the tutor? Let me know in the comments. If you love this grounded, no-nonsense drama, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. See you next time.